Fleur Hassan-Nahoum is the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and joins us right now as well. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us in very difficult circumstances, of course. I've seen you being interviewed over the weekend talking about the impact this has had on people. We want to get into some, the politics and the practicalities. But first, if you could tell my audience what the impact of these attacks has had on the Israeli people, on ordinary Israeli citizens going about their daily lives.
Well, Julia, we're traumatized, really. It's so ironic that about a week ago, when we were commemorating 50 years of the Yom Kippur War, which was one of the most devastating wars launched against Israel, and also was an intelligence failure that nobody saw coming, the question on everybody's mind was, could the Yom Kippur War or anything like it happen again? And we were all commentating and, different articles came out. Little did we understand that less than a week after those debates, we were going to have a situation that we never expected. Saturday morning wasn't just the Sabbath for us, but it was also a high holy day in the Jewish calendar. And we woke up to sirens. I quickly scuffled with my 4 children into our bomb shelter. We're lucky enough to have one at home. Many people don't. The mayor of Jerusalem, of course, opened up all the public bomb shelters. And then we understood the scale of the massacre. This is nothing less than a massacre in terms of the country and the population that we have here. This is the worst attack on civilians in our history. And it's definitely the worst attack in 50 years. The mood is of shock and trauma. The fact that people in the south of Israel were attacked in their own homes, people were executed in their own beds, elderly people, babies, children, they did not discriminate. The fact that there was, ironically, a peace festival, a music festival, and young people were just literally gunned down like animals on the street. Israel is a small country and we're all affected. We all know people. A friend of mine, her son has disappeared. A 23-year-old boy has disappeared. We're all affected by this. We all know somebody affected by this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this has been deeply traumatic. In terms of the retaliation, I think a lot of people would understand, Israel needs to have revenge, it needs to defend itself. There will be some question marks raised internationally about the level of retaliation, massive missile attacks on one of the most crowded places in the world, the Gaza Strip. People told, leave your homes, leave Gaza. They can't leave. The borders are all closed. Egypt and Israel, the borders are closed. Apartment buildings being razed to the ground. Water, access to food and fuel and electricity cut off. Is that an appropriate reaction to what happened on Saturday?
Julia, this is not about revenge. This is about the dismantling of the terrorist infrastructure so that they can't do that again. Ultimately, this gets out of hand. It becomes existential for Israel. Israel has not started one single war, but we've won all of the wars, and we will win this war. But the question is, what price are we going to have to pay? And why on earth did they start this to begin with? That's what we've got to understand. I agree wholeheartedly with your guest who spoke previously. What are they actually gaining from this? And, people forget that Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005. They are wrongly talking about an occupation. There's no occupation in Gaza. When Israel left Gaza in 2005, it was in the hope that they would take this strip and they would turn it into something which would eventually become a future state of Palestine. First of all, Fatah took over, and then they had one election where Hamas took over, and of course, there's not been an election since. And Hamas turned it essentially into Beirut instead of turning it into Dubai. That's what it could have been. They had the most beautiful beach strip in the whole region, and they've turned it into Beirut instead of turning it into Dubai. Now, is that on us also? We had perfectly good relationship with Fatah when they were in Gaza. When Hamas took over, that's when the rockets started coming into southern Israel. And the lives of the people in the south of Israel have been a misery. For years, we've been hosting in Jerusalem young children to get away from the constant rocket attacks from a war that happened once a year. These kids have grown up with this trauma of sirens. My kids are lucky. We live in Jerusalem. It's happened. It's not been pleasant. but it's not a daily occurrence.
Okay.
And so, and what for? Why are they throwing rockets? We left Gaza. What are they fighting for? What exactly are they fighting for? It's very simple. When you look at the Hamas charter, it says that they don't want any peaceful resolution. They want the destruction of the state of Israel.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this. This is in the actual documents, you know, the founding documents of Hamas.
Absolutely.
And in their statements. What do you make of the protests in many countries around the world about these attacks on Israel? So people protesting Israel, just as Israel faced that massacre. We've seen protests in the streets in Birmingham, in London, in Manchester, and in I think in Liverpool as well, in the UK, where we've had people who are perfectly entitled to, you know, be pro-Palestinian, support the cause of the people in Gaza, but they've been chanting, among other things, from the river to the sea. This, of course, is a chant associated with Hamas, and it means, does it not, the obliteration of Israel, the end of Israel, that you go from the river, the West Bank of the river, to the sea, and therefore there'll be no Israel. What do you make of that international reaction?
Well, from the river to the sea, you're quite right, is a call for the destruction of the state of Israel. But let me just tell you something even more disturbing. The reason why we have generations and generations of Palestinians that do not want peace in the region is because this, from the river to the sea, is in their educational system, which is funded by UNRWA through the UN. Amongst the countries, the UK is funding an educational system that is teaching incitement, hatred, and from the river to the sea. And I know that the UK is well-meaning and they think that they're helping, but all of these countries are funding a school system that is taking us further away from peace and not closer to peace. I'm not saying stop funding. I'm saying fund on the condition that at least the brainwashing in the school books that you're paying for is removed. That's all that I'm asking for, and I've been lobbying about this subject for many years
Just
now.
finally, and briefly, if you would, where does this end? How does this end? Does this end?
You know, I can't begin to tell you how depressed we are about it here in Israel. Because in the last few months, Israel increased the work permits for Gazans to come into Israel to work. Why do they need to come into Israel to work? Because, of course, Hamas is busy building tunnels and weaponry rather than building an economy for their people or any type of bright future. And so the best I can hope for is to get a work permit to come into Israel every day. And all we've done over the last few months is ease their living conditions, bring in more humanitarian aid, open our borders more than Egypt opens its borders. And this is what we get in return. I don't know where this ends, but the Palestinian people deserve better leaders.
Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.